So first of all, thank you so much everyone for joining us today for our webinar, Critical Intersections, Anti-Racism and Female Genital Cutting. This webinar will explore the intersection of anti-racism work and the work to end FGC. First coined in 1989 by Professor Kimberly Williams Crenshaw, the term intersectionality was created to help us understand the interconnected nature of social categorizations, such as race, class, and gender, as they apply to any given group or individual, regarded as creating overlapping and interdependent systems of discrimination or disadvantage. An intersectional approach to all social movements is crucial to address the intersecting oppressions that impact different communities. And although female genital cutting is not limited to any one community, misconceptions rooted in racism, Islamophobia, and xenophobia have still negatively impacted the movement to end FGC, as well as survivors themselves. In our work to end FGC, we must use an intersectional approach to support the needs of all women impacted by FGC and bring about substantial change. We are joined today by 4 expert panelists, including Leyla Hussein, Aarefa Johari, Aissata Camara, Sunera Sadicali, who will explore the intersection of FGC in a panel moderated by Sahiyo US Executive Director Maria Taher. These renowned activists have worked in the field of FGC prevention and survivor support, exploring the critical intersections where this form of gender-based violence meets systemic racism. Our guest speakers' experiences will expand the conversation how FGC survivors and advocates for change often have to push back against racist narratives in their work and in their journey towards healing, as well as how systemic racism can delay substantial change on this issue. During this webinar, you'll be a part of the discussion about how we can all become better educated and better advocates in the journey to end systemic racism and FGC. Can we go to the agenda slide, please? Oh, actually, I'm wondering if we can go back to the agenda slide if that's possible. Thank you so much. So before we get started officially with our webinar, I would just like to go over the agenda for our event today. So today we're going to start with a quick overview of the work Sahiyo has done, as well as introduce our amazing panelists and their work. Following that, we'll lead a short moderated discussion, and after the panel, we hope to have time for our audience to ask our expert panelists questions. So if you have a question that you want to ask to our panelists live, please submit your question specifically to the Q&A box, and we'll select a few questions if we have time. Next slide, please. And for those who aren't aware of Sahiyo, we are an organization with the mission to empower Asian and other communities to end female genital cutting and create positive social change through dialogue, education, and collaboration based on community involvement. We do this by utilizing storytelling in a variety of ways through our programming to support survivors and working communities. One such program is our Voices to End FGMC digital storytelling project, in which advocates share their stories in connection with this work. You'll get the chance to see 2 of those videos today, as 2 of our speakers, Aarefa Johari and Sunera Sadicali, took part in workshops connected to this project. Next slide. Actually, could we, yeah, perfect. So I wanted to quickly introduce our amazing moderator for this panel today, Maria Taher. So Maria is one of Sahiyo's co-founders and has worked in the field of gender-based violence prevention for over a decade. She's a strong believer in the power that storytelling has to create change. And I want to thank you so much for joining us today, Maria. And if you'd like to introduce yourself quickly, please feel free.
Great. Thank you so much, Kate. And thank you to everybody who has registered for this event and is attending. I'm really looking forward to this conversation. And so you will hear from me more later.
Alrighty, thank you so much. And now to introduce our first panelist, if we can go to the next slide. So today we are graciously joined by Aarefa Johari. Aarefa is a journalist, feminist, and activist based in Mumbai, India. Aarefa is also a senior reporter with Squirrel.in, where she covers gender and labor, and she has been active in speaking out against female genital cutting since 2012 and is one of the 5 original co-founders of Sahiyo as well. And we want to thank you again so much for joining us, Aarefa, and if you'd like to quickly introduce yourself as well, please feel free.
No, I just want to say hi to everyone. Glad to be here. I think we'll have a long discussion ahead, so let's continue.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And if we can go to the next slide. So in conjunction with Sahiyo's Voices to End FGMC digital storytelling project, Aarefa helped create this video, which we'll watch now.
At the age of 7, a girl named Azamat was taken by her own family members to the home of a strange lady who cut her genitals. They were following an ancient religious tradition, and Azamat was too young to know words like clitoris or consent. She could do nothing. That girl was me. At the age of 11, my name was suddenly changed from Azamat to Aarefa, simply because our community's religious leader directed my family to do so. By this time, I was beginning to understand the concept of consent, and I tried hard to protest. But I was still too young to prevail. Once again, I could do nothing. Then, when I was in my 20s, a woman from my community started an online petition urging our religious leader to end the practice of khatna or circumcision on girls. That woman was anonymous, but she had said in public what I had been raging about at home for years. I knew at that moment that I wanted to speak out, openly, publicly, assertively. I wanted my voice to be heard because I was finally old enough to know what clitoris means and what consent means. And I was old enough to actually do something, to convince other families not to harm their daughters in the name of religion. And now I knew that I could prevail. So I started speaking out. I faced anger from some relatives. One of them told me, girls who are not cut turn into prostitutes. I faced discouragement from others. Why speak publicly about the community? They said. Khatna will stop on its own over time. But change does not always just happen on its own. Sometimes it has to be fought for, one dissenting voice at a time, until the chorus is too resounding to ignore.
Yeah, thank you so much, Aarefa, for allowing us to share such a powerful video and joining us today. Yeah, and feel free, we're going to be watching a couple videos. Please feel free to leave your reflections in the chat as well. So if we can go to the next slide. So today we're also joined by Aissata Camara. Aissata is a professional with over a decade of program development and management, strategic planning, and relationship building experience in nonprofit, local government, and international affairs. She has received numerous awards for her work, including the New York State Assembly Certificate of Merit, Knights of Pythias Medal of Achievement, the Hackett Medal for Oratory Excellence, and the Joe Ivy Bufford Award. Aissata is also a frequent speaker at conferences, including high-level events of the United Nations. Thank you so much for joining us, Aissata, and if you'd like to introduce yourself, please feel free to do that as well.
Thank you so much, Catherine. I think you've introduced me, so that's fine, but I'm really excited to be with you all today and to have this amazing conversation, so looking forward.
Thank you so much. And as I mentioned before, Aissata has spoken at a lot of high-level events. And at one such UN event, Aissata spoke about the importance of survivor-centered activism, and we wanted to highlight that powerful clip from her interview as well.
There's some story because for many years, my sister, Aarefa, and I, we used to come to the we used to go in other places, in other meetings, and we would just hear numbers thrown at us. 200 million women are at risk of female genital cutting, but those were just numbers. The people behind those numbers were not highlighted. And now at this summit, we're actually highlighting the survivors, we're highlighting the people behind the numbers, and taking ownership of this movement, of this issue, and actually making sure that we're ending it. We're not just talking about it, we're doing it. I think that a powerful story that I would like to share is just how activists from the UK have been able to mentor us here in the US in making sure that we're doing the right work. So I think that people like Leila, people like Aarefa, they have really been there as a support for us because it's very hard to come out and to talk about female genital cutting. So So we have built this sisterhood, this bond, Jaha, all of us, and we're trying to end this practice because of the fact that it's not about one person. And I think that what we have done.
Catherine, there seems to be an audio issue.
Yeah, I think I was noticing that as well. And so I will send the link in the chat box as well so that everyone can watch the full clip interview with audio, if that sounds good. So sorry about that small technical issue. Yeah, but thank you so much, Aissata, for joining us, and we're really honored to have you with us here today. So if we can go on to the next slide. So next up, we're also joined today by Sunera Sadicali. Born in 1983 in Mozambique, Sunera moved to Lisbon when she was 2 years old. Later, she then moved to Spain to study medicine by the age of 19 and finished her family medicine residency in Madrid. She has been politically active since the birth of her second child in 2012 in women's issues, decolonial feminism, anti-racism, and healthcare activism. Sunera is constantly trying to reconcile and find balance between motherhood, art, her work as a family doctor, and political activism. Thank you again so much for joining us, Sunera. If you'd like to introduce yourself as well.
Thank you so much for inviting me in this so important dialogue. I just want to thank you everybody to be here and hope to have continued the discussion together.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And in conjunction with Sahiyo's Voices to End FGMC project, Sunera also helped create a video that addresses the ways in which systemic racism and FGC often intersect to negatively impact survivors. So if we can go ahead and watch that video now.
Legs wide open, pointing to the sky, you look up to the ceiling of the hospital. Your external genitalia exposed to the open air. Others controlling, manipulating, mess with your axis. My first lithotomy, when they cut a piece of clitoris, 4 or 5 millimeters of vital tissue, having completed 8 rounds around the world, by ritual, by patriarchal order. The same position at 25, giving birth to my daughter. A white man, obstetrician, he thrust his whole hand into my vagina and brutally performed the Hamilton vaginal touch without any prior notice or consent. Escalation of pain, violence, pain, vomiting, violence, intensifying. A midwife at the Reina Sofia hospital in Cordoba was laughing at my pain, making fun of my requests, of my decision to avoid anesthesia. I was questioned because of my ethnic origins. I was invaded with irrelevant questions while contracted in pain. This white woman left me in a lithotomy position, lonely, abandoned, in that room, on that cold gurney, the same gurney of mutilation. When 2 of my own women grabbed my legs, held me down to dissect that irrelevant piece of clitoris. My delivery continued, in lithotomy, asking for help to endure the pain. I give up, and I finally asked for the epidural. That woman succeeded, abused, violated. Power abuse and racism enacted in all its splendor and impunity. I gained strength and expelled from myself my whole being. They cut part of the vaginal tissue and appeased it to me without warning, neither consent. All goes well, they say. My daughter is fine. No reason, no consent. 2 cuts in lithotomy position, looking at the ceiling, vulnerable with legs wide open, exposed. Katna, all these cuttings, prints of patriarchy, misogyny, institutional racism, woman towards woman.
Yeah, thank you so much, Sunera, for sharing such a powerful story. And we're so happy to have you here today to contribute to our conversation. And last but not least, if we can introduce our final panelist. Today, we're joined by Leyla Hussein. Leyla is an anti-FGM campaigner and a survivor who shares her personal experience with FGM with the goal of protecting girls from this abusive practice. Originally from Somalia, Leyla works as a psychotherapist in the United Kingdom and addresses the prevalence of FGM around the world. And we want to thank you so much for joining us today, Leyla. And if you'd like to take a few seconds to say a few words about yourself, please feel free to do that as well.
Thank you, everyone. Sahiyo, thank you for having me. I guess the only thing I would like to add is currently I'm the Global Advocacy Director for the Africa-led movement. So that's the work that brings me in Africa, and actually very much links for the conversation we're going to be hopefully be having today. And very grateful that we've created this safe space to have this conversation. It's about time. I think those that know me who have joined knows I've been ranting on about this for a very long time. So I'm glad we're finally having these conversations publicly too. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you so much. And we're really so honored to have you here today. If we can go to the next slide, we're actually going to show our last video, which Leyla made in partnership with the Avengers, in which she speaks out about how systemic racism impacts the work to end FGM as well as survivors themselves. So we can go ahead and play that video.
What if you knew a healthcare professional is the reason why my daughter hasn't undergone FGM, and also ensured I was supported as a survivor? In Britain, we have to call out British people. I'm British. We don't like to speak about certain things, especially if it's about sex, religion, and race. And if you're going to talk about FGM, you have to have those three conversations. So nearly 19 years ago, I was pregnant with my daughter, and when she was born, 3 months old, a nurse asked me what my pregnancy was like. So she went back to my notes and she said, "Ms. Hussein, can I check?" She goes, "I understand you're from Somalia, and I know in Somalia they practice something called female genital mutilation. Can I check if you've been through this?" So quickly, and I remember this, I did not feel judged by her. She was checking with me because she stepped in when a lot of people missed me. She was the first person to say to me what I experienced was abuse. I never heard it in that context before. I mean, sometimes I actually imagine, oh my God, what would have happened if I never met Jennifer? Would I have done? I might have done type 1 to my daughter because I didn't think type 1 was terrible, but not thinking about pinning her down, holding her, touching her genitalia was a violation. That is something I learned. So don't other girls deserve this? Don't other mothers like me? Or another woman who comes from a family where this is practiced, doesn't she deserve that same information? And the only people that can give that kind of information is your health professional. In the UK, we have services are growing, have been growing over the years, but still not enough. And unfortunately, a lot of the services are based in London. But what about all the other women who don't live in London? But also training our health professionals appropriately and better and well equipped to deal with this, then we might not need some of the services either. Do you see what I mean? I wish my GP asked me that question. I wish my midwife, because they just didn't have the right training. No one told her, why are you so worried about this? What views are you holding to be worried about asking me? I think what people need to understand, especially if you're a British Black brown woman who's an FGM survivor, the system here is racist, full stop. So because of that, the health system now is not giving you what you need. So the fact that we don't have access to services, it's how I'm not treated equally to everybody else in this health system. And the reason FGM is really critical, FGM is affected by the most vulnerable human being globally, which is the Black female girl child who is African. Like literally, she is the most vulnerable human being in the world. She's the one who's left behind, the last human being that we think of. And FGM majority affects that girl. So the world doesn't, those who hold resources never think of her. She's never in their radar. FGM, it's fundamentally that because we live in a world where it's still okay to control the female body and sexuality. And that's why I'm always saying the system has to change. It's not just doing a workshop around FGM. FGM happens. We have a system that says abusing women, controlling their sexuality is acceptable, it's okay, and it's promoted. Until we address it as that, it's not going to go anywhere, I promise you.
Yeah, thank you so much for that video, Leyla. I think it's really impactful and such a powerful video. And thank you to all of our panelists for allowing us to show those videos and highlight your work. So if we can go to the last slide. Yeah, I think without further ado, I will hand it over to Maria for the moderated panel discussion. Thank you so much.
Great, thank you so much, Kate. And I think we can actually take the PowerPoint off so that we can see our panelists' faces too as we have this conversation. So thanks. So thank you again for attending this event. And as Kate mentioned earlier, we know that an intersectional approach to social movements is very crucial to addressing intersecting or intersectional oppressions as well that may impact a community or individual. And we do recognize today that FGMC is truly global, as our participants' videos have shown, and then also as we're going to be discussing today. Yet, there are many misconceptions on who it occurs to and where it is rooted that are also based in racism, Islamophobia, and xenophobia. And all of us here today have seen this play out in various ways in our personal lives and our professional lives when it comes to this topic. So with that in mind, I want to ask my first question to all of the panelists. I would love to ask you more about, in your opinion, why is understanding how FGMC, female genital mutilation or female genital cutting, how it intersects with other forms of oppression, such as racism, both systemic, explicit, implicit, important in our work? And in connection to that, how do you see racism as a challenge or a barrier in your own culture or your own community or country contexts? And to start with, I would love to ask Aarefa your thoughts first on this question, and then maybe we could move to Leyla and to Sunera and to Aissata.
Thanks for that question, Maria. Since I come from India, I'm going to give a bit of an Indian perspective because I think racism, as is generally understood in the Western world, is usually refers to issues of discrimination based on skin color. And of course, that happens in India, but in the context of FGC, I'd like to extend that definition to discrimination based on caste and a community that we see. I mean, of course, we see that all over the world, but it's quite specific. It plays out in a very specific context in India, where FGC is practiced by a small minority within a small minority. And it's not practiced widely by, most of the Muslim community in India. It's practiced by just a small handful of the Muslim community. And we don't know as of now whether there are any other communities in the country that practice it. And and already in, the political situation in India is quite charged when it comes to communal divisions. There is a huge current of Islamophobia that is playing out, and we supported by our current government, which is extremely right-wing and extremely Hindu focused, promoting a certain brand of fundamentalist Hinduism. Which obviously it goes without saying that it doesn't correspond to the beliefs of most ordinary practicing Hindus, but it's directed against Muslims, and in general the idea of the circumcised Muslim, and it's the reference to male circumcision, is used as an abusive term, as a means of putting down the Muslim community and Muslim men. So, and the type of genital cutting practice for girls in my community, which is the Bohra community, which is a tiny subsect of the Muslim community in India, that is, we refer to it as this, the word we use is the same, khatna, circumcision. So there's huge implications when we talk about, when we talk about ending khatna and specifically ending female khatna in India. You have to be so conscious about how the entire movement and any activism would be and could be and does get appropriated by the Hindu right wing, which which uses it as a weapon to attack Muslims then. And then there's also racism within the community, where the community that practices it, and I'm specifically talking about my community, we can be very racist within ourselves. And I mean, I can talk more about that later as well, but maybe perhaps we can move on to the other panelists.
Great, thank you so much, Aarefa. And I think another reason why we wanted to ask this question in specific about country context and also your own environment is that we do recognize that this can look a little bit differently depending on where you are. And I think you brought up some good points in terms of how systemic oppressions of various sorts do play out within India and in connection to FGMC there too. So I would love to move on to another speaker and to think about another part of the world as well too. So Leyla, I would love to ask you your thoughts on this first question too, and in your own experience, how this plays out. You had a very powerful video that we saw in which you started to discuss this conversation, but would love to hear from you as well.
Yeah, I think before I answer my question, I think just a bit of a warning, this is a very difficult conversation, and there are a lot of survivors on this panel and those on the call. So I think just be very mindful. This is a very difficult conversation we're having. Please take care of yourself. I'm just coming out of an annual leave for this because I knew I was going to be on a panel with survivors. So I'm here as in terms of solidarity as well. I think that's really neat. I think we need to really take care of ourselves, because what many people don't understand, as survivors are putting ourselves at the forefront at all times, meaning we are reliving our traumas over and over again. I think it's very important to remind those online that. So, and all three of you, thank you for sharing your stories. I think it's such a it's such a not just a brave move to do that, but you're using your stories to educate people. I think it's so important too. So I wanted to acknowledge all of you for being so brave. So just coming back to your question, Maria, I think over the years, one of the things I noticed very early on, I've been doing this work for 18 years now. One of the things I noticed early on is asking a question: why is the system ignoring these girls of color? Just in general, we're not even talking about FGM. So the system is already built that way to actually put you in such a position. But also, if we connect this to FGM, like I said in the video, you cannot tackle FGM, address FGM, if you're not talking about race, gender, and sexuality, because those three are quite key, very key to this conversation, because we cannot tackle this without addressing those points. But my concern sometimes is us, the gatekeepers, who are not really addressing that conversation. It's very important, because all of us on this screen now, we are all holding power. We hold the power to actually clarify this conversation once and for all. Because it's easy to say, it's easy for me to say the UK is racist, it's a racist system. I know that, I don't need to keep unpacking that. But those of us who are at the forefront of this work, if we are not calling this violence against children, if this was a white girl right now, blonde, blue-eyed girl from England, it will not be called FGM or FGC or FG cutting or let's talk to community. The actual legal term would have been serious sexual assault. Touching someone's genitalia, it's actually sexual assault. Taking a blade to it, any form of instrument or weapon, is a serious assault. So actually, I would like to challenge us all, in order for us to even get somewhere, those of us on the screen, we need to change how we talk about this, because we are gatekeepers. We are holding power in these spaces. It's so key that we do that. So we know the system is racist, but if we are not addressing this, those of us at the forefront, if Leila's not addressing this, if Sahiyo is not addressing this, Maria is not addressing this, we are all part of the problem. I think it's important we take accountability for that. So it's really key. It's okay to constantly point the problem, but where is the solution? That's where I'm at, because we know why this is being ignored, but we also play a crucial role as the gatekeepers, as the leaders of these conversations, because we do hold power. We cannot pretend that's not happening. We have the privilege. How many of us go to panels every other week? We know that, but we look like the women and the girls who have been cut. So we owe it. As a therapist, I will not give the women justice if I do not name what they were feeling. If a woman's describing something so violating, I have to name it. By not naming it, it's where the problem lies. So that's where a lot of our challenge. So this is absolutely about racism, the control of our sexuality. We need to, so I'm challenging everybody on this call, anyone who's running an organization, please do us all a favor and call this for what it is. Maybe we might actually see some solutions. We might actually start tackling this system. But when we are the gatekeepers and not naming, oh my God, how offensive is that to our girls who don't have a voice? Because this is about power. We are dismantling power when doing this work. Because racism is about, it's holding power against a marginalized group. So we need to start dismantling that power. So those of us who have power on this call, we need to name it for what it is. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Leyla.
As you can see, I'm very passionate about this. And I'll be honest with you, I'm really fed up. I'm going to be honest. After 18 years, it's seriously exhausting to see African girls and Asian girls constantly being talked about as if they're separate subjects. They're not. But it has to start with us on this call. Thank you.
Yeah, completely agree with you. And I'm so glad you're passionate about this too. So please share all your thoughts with us. We wanted you on this panel to do so. But one thing I wanted to mention before, I would love to have our other two panelists also share their thoughts, was when you were talking, I've been doing a lot of work in the US on state legislation too. And it's surprising how difficult it actually is to pass legislation around FGMC too. And I know people have different views about it too, but one of the challenges that I was not expecting, well, I want to say I expect it now, but probably originally when I did this, was this opposition to even recognizing it as something that is a form of child abuse, and really wanting to say that, no, this is something that from other folks outside of practicing communities who might not be familiar, but almost like in a way of protecting and say, like, we can't criminalize it because it's being done for the good of the girl. And I'm not saying that criminalization is just the one sole answer, but it's this, when you're having actually members of the community talk about this and talking about how challenging it is, and then not hearing their stories and wanting to sort of give your own solutions without even taking that into consideration, that is very frustrating for me. And I've been encountering that over and over again when it comes to state legislation. But I can talk about that more later on. And I would really love to hear more from Sunera and Aissata as well too on this question.
Sure. I guess I could jump in here. Thank you all so much. I agree with Leyla that this is not an easy topic to talk about as survivors, but we do it because we know that our voices matter. So I am the co-founder of There's No Limit Foundation. Our goal is to promote dignity and security. And we want to do that because we work with communities that are living in extreme poverty, especially our women and girls and our people with disabilities. And so when it comes to the idea of talking about issues of racism and other issues and how they affect FGM, we have to understand that we can't talk about the right to one's body at all if we don't talk about ending female genital mutilation. And I have, similar to Leyla, I've been doing this for many years now. And I remember maybe a decade or so ago being in rooms where the issue of female genital mutilation was being talked about as an African issue. And that had a lot of ramifications because it meant that individuals could choose to check in and check out in terms of action, right? And particularly it meant that by saying this is an African issue, people could choose not to work on it because of their understanding of our communities, right? They will think that, well, these communities are backward, these communities, I had people tell me, our communities are barbaric, which I was not very pleased with. But that is actually why they were doing it, because they didn't want to actually take action on ending female genital mutilation. So our organization, we work both on the continent of Africa and in the US. And I think I want to give you two perspectives from that work that will help us with this conversation. So on the continent, the issue of FGM comes loaded, right? When looking at NGOs that came from overseas to work in our communities, we saw a colonial approach to problem solving. Specifically, there was a lack of autonomy in the ways that our communities could actually decide to address the issue of FGM and other issues. But it was also, and it still is sometimes, unfortunately, a top-down approach, an approach that is founded on the idea that our communities and our people are less than or less able to do anything. And in addition to that, these organizations have created systems that hinder true community development by focusing more on short-term handouts instead of co-designing sustainable solutions. They see our groups as homogeneous groups, so that robs us of the many mosaic and beauty of our communities. And particularly, they also ignore other identities that we have, right? So yes, I am a woman, but I am also an African woman, but I am also a Muslim woman. And there are many, many other layers to who I am. And those layers must be looked at when we're talking about ending female genital mutilation in these communities. In addition to that, we also inherited systems that are weak because we actually do not operate within them. So when you look at countries like the Republic of Guinea, our legal system is there, but many community members do not go through the legal system to actually solve issues. So you have systems that were propped up, but without actual community engagement. And so they fail girls over and over again, because when you look at our constitutions, FGM is outlawed, but when you look at the practicality of it, there is nothing that is being done. And I come to the US now to say that we all know that racism has been an issue here, right? And I think George Floyd and all of the Black Lives Matter movement have really brought the discussion to the center, but it's still not enough. When I'm talking to communities here about ending female genital mutilation, they dread the idea of having to report cases because it means that they have to have interactions with police systems, they have to have interactions with court systems, and these are systems that have oppressed these communities, and they do not want to have to put themselves or other members of their families through it, right? And then the final thing that I will say on the US side also is that when you look at, for example, myself, I am, again, a Black Muslim woman. I am a big woman, right? So all of these identities come into play in the US as well, because the rhetoric that we often hear about our communities are always negative. And sometimes our communities are tired. Like Leila said, we are really fed up because we know that this is an issue that needs to be addressed. But when we go to address it, everything else is discussed, but why we're actually there. And that's why I think we have to talk about FGM as we talk about the Me Too movement. We have to talk about FGM as we talk about the Black Lives Matter movement, because it is all related. And I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Aissata. I completely agree with you as well, too. And I would love us to kind of go, because I know there's a lot more conversation we want to be able to have, but Sunera, I would love to give you an opportunity to add in your thoughts. And then I also, before we move to the next question, if any of our panelists would like to respond to any of the comments or thoughts that have been shared, please feel free to do that too. So Sunera, if you would like to share your thoughts first.
Well, I'm really grateful for this conversation, and I agree with everything. And of course, Dr. Hussein said, no, it's overwhelming, and it's really completely the truth. I can speak with as a professional, as a medical professional, primary care physician. I worked in Spain and now working in Sweden. And as my own personal experience that I tried to expose in the storytelling. And first is the thing is we cannot, as Leyla and Aarefa and Aissata saying, it's like racism is structural. So the racism is invented by the colonial times to perpetuate what was done in that time. So it's like 500 years of colonialism, and racism cannot be separated with colonialism, and the colonialism still exists in other ways. So what I feel as I can talk first as a professional, as a family doctor, and as in the gatekeeper, is that I see racism every day, every time, and it's there in every single gesture. So it's there every time. So of course, if we the racism exists in different ways, and the most difficult racism is when we cannot talk. Is when people say black or just insult, it's really easy to acknowledge that type of racism. But this silent racism that we see every day, that's really difficult. So and we create the other, and that's what I want to talk with FGM, is that this other, I mean, in Sweden, which is a very rich country, they have a lot of instruments. They have we have protocols. We have a lot of financing for ending inequalities. Well, this FGM is criminalized, and this the most people, gatekeepers, professionals, psychotherapists, like midwives, are not trained to deal with this issue. Sweden has received a lot of immigrants since almost 60 years ago. There have been coming more and more immigrants from every part of the world, especially Africa, Middle East, and so they have more than 30,000 people that are women that are undergone FGM, and they are not trained on this. We have studies showing the perception of African women, or because the majority of African women, perception on how they are treated with the midwives in pregnancy, especially in pregnancy, and all this sexual health, and it's tremendous. I mean, it's really bad, the situation, because they feel there is a racism everywhere. There is misconceptions, there is cultural bias, there is my point is that to address the FGM is addressing not addressing the structural racism, which is everywhere. And I myself, as a survivor also of FGM, when I was a teenager, I was really afraid to go to the gynecologist, because I was afraid to be seen as part of a savage tradition. So this is the thing is, it's really difficult not to talk about FGM, not talking about racism and structural oppressions. And intersectionality is because there's someone that wrote about the intersectionality theory that come from Black feminist traditions being watered down also, and it's true that it's happening, but this is really important in FGM, because people, the women that are without documentation, that don't know the language, they are exposed to these oppressions in healthcare and everywhere.
Thank you, Sunera. When you were speaking in particular about going to visit the gynecologist, it just brought back my own memories. And so I haven't said that, but I'm a survivor as well too. But I do remember the first time I wanted to try to learn a little bit more about what was happening to me. And I actually remember this look of just the nurse practitioner just gave me this kind of look of like shock. And I did feel that othering in a way too, that you were mentioning. And I think that that is very true when we're talking about this issue, particularly in any context that we're having, but just this othering that it happens to other people. Within India, Aarefa, you were starting to talk about it, but within the racism, within in the Bora community and the othering and trying to disconnect the different types of FGMC without realizing that they're all forms of abuse in a way too. But that was something that was always made me hesitant for a very long time to even reveal that this happened to me because of that quick look that just stayed with me in terms of how she looked in that. And it was something that I don't really want to admit this to other healthcare professionals because I don't want to be viewed as an other. And it also kind of recognizes how much we do need healthcare in the healthcare profession to be trained around this as well, which is, I think we all agree on that, and we all know that that's very true, but also leads to our next question. But before I jump into that, does anybody have any quick thoughts or reflections they wanted to add on to this first question?
So I think that something that was being asked is why is it that FGM is not part or is not showing up in other movements, such as the Me Too movement and the Black Lives Matter movement. And I think that this speaks to the fact that our communities, right, even within ourselves, there's a lot of separation, right? And there's this sense that we have to fight one issue at a time, and that adding FGM maybe to Black Lives Matter issues dilutes it, and then it takes away the attention. And I've had conversations with a lot of activists, and I think that what we have to realize that these issues have to be addressed at the same time, right? And if you as a leader of a movement cannot address it, then bring someone along that could help in addressing it. But the idea of erasing it from the discussion, I think really lessens the work, but then it also really segment certain communities, because I am a Black woman, but I am also a survivor of female genital mutilation. So when you're asking me to differentiate those two, you're really leaving me still having my needs unanswered. So I just wanted to add that to the conversation and say that we all have to work together, and we all have to try and make sure that we address these issues. And that's part of the mentality, right? We've been told that we could only get one of our needs met at a time. And we have to say, F that, we could actually get all of our needs met, and you have to listen to what we have to do. And we're not going to wait for you to solve it for us. We're going to solve it for ourselves. Thanks.
Thank you, Aissata. I'm so glad you mentioned that and brought that up. All right, I'm just looking at the time and I'm realizing that we don't have much time left, but I'd still love to continue this conversation. So just our next question. And Sunera, you started to talk a little bit about racism and what you faced in the medical health profession within Sweden, and then within your own personal life, and in as a clinician too. And so I would love to actually bring Leyla into this conversation too, particularly since you are a psychotherapist, and really thinking about what are some examples. We've already started sharing it. So maybe anything you'd like to add about what you have seen or witnessed in terms of encountering racism and receiving service and accessing services for survivors, for those you work with. And then on the flip side, are there any promising practices that you have seen that have worked towards addressing these challenges, or what are things that we could potentially try to do to address any of these challenges? And I realize that's a very big question and that this is a very big issue, but if you have any thoughts or experiences around that, that would be great to hear. Maybe Leyla, yeah, we could start with you.
Yeah, oh God, that's a big question. How long do we have? I mean, if I speak for the UK, for example, nearly 18, 20 years ago, the conversation around mental health and FGM wasn't even being had. It really was non-existent. I think the physical effects are so horrific. There was only that conversation was happening. But in the UK in general, our mental health service is not that great anyway. So yet again, if you're a woman, Black, right at the back of all of this. And what's really sad till in the UK is Dahlia Project was actually, when I founded Dahlia Project was 2013, it was the first counseling service in the whole of Europe. But what we've done, what I guess the good thing that came out of this, if you get a chance, if you go to our website, dahliaproject.org, we actually developed guidelines, the first ever guidelines written for clinicians in psychotherapy. That's never happened before. So that was important. So we put ourselves in a position now where we are sharing all our learnings. Unfortunately, I think anywhere in the world, COVID has kind of hit resources with everybody. But what's so sad about all of this, when statistically every 11 second or 10 second, a girl is cut or mutilated, that's not considered a pandemic. Isn't that interesting? No one is marching out in the Black Lives Matter marches for these girls. You know, as somebody said, you know, you don't see the Me Too movement come on. Yet again, even within those systems, there is no voice for women like us or girls like us. So changes happening is very slow. I guess the approach I'm taking is like, I'm just fed up. I'm not tiptoeing around this. I don't want to play nice. I don't give a flying F about what the religious leaders think. I just don't. I don't care anyone who holds power, to be honest. I'm here to ensure those whose powers are being controlled, they can have a space to really reclaim their power. As a therapist, what we do at Dahlia is for the women to reclaim their power, their sexuality, their bodies. But unfortunately, the system, we are still funded. Only a year ago, we got a little bit of money from the Home Office, but we're still literally, Dahlia has been functioning this whole time just from donations, from good people, really. And that yet again, just because of the pandemic, me and my very good friend Fatima Haji founded a space for Black women, specific for Black women, because COVID, has really, tested all our mental health issues. But if you're a Black woman, it was a whole different level of symptoms they were suffering from. And someone said to me, you think raising money for FGM was bad? Try raising money issues around Black women. And let me tell you, it's been a really difficult thing to witness. So the system, we have to constantly challenge the system, call out the racism. One of the best ways of challenging the system is constantly calling it out. It's not to accept it or be okay with it or be nice to it. Yes, go and support the communities you're supporting, but we are in a position when the UK government tells me these things are great, I'm not there to say things are brilliant. I'm like, okay, we made a bit of a movement, but we got this to do. We have to call I'm a taxpayer, so I expect my money to go somewhere that will benefit those that look like me too. So it's really key. So things are moving. Currently with the UK aid cuts, it's devastating how this is going to be impacting the grassroots work that's happening in Africa. In Kenya, for example, safe houses were locked. It was considered a place of gathering. This is 2021, so again, the system is built in a way where, spaces where girls could be protected or kept safe, it's not challenged. No one is outraged about this. That's what I'm asking everybody, everyone. We have to be outraged together. In the UK, where we made a big difference, it's when the documentary The Cruel Cut came out, there was a public outrage. Public outrage really gets us best results from my experience. Because you know why? We put these politicians in their positions. So they're gonna have to listen when we are annoyed and pissed off. So I definitely encourage that. That's how you change the system. I'm not saying go attack people, but we need to challenge, we need to name and acknowledge these systems are not made for us and it's not there to protect us. We have to call it out. We can't just pretend it's okay the whole time.
And that's part of the reason we're having this conversation, to help call it out too.
Absolutely.
So, I know we're running out of time, but I also believe the panelists can stay on for a few more minutes longer. So I'm going to transition to kind of a related question, but open it up. Since Leyla, you mentioned systems, calling it out. I also want to bring Aarefa back into this and thinking about other systems, particularly since you are a journalist, and really thinking about how does media impact FGMC? And I know that you have a lot of experience around that, and particularly also best practices and also misinformation that can be passed around through media sources too. We all know media is incredibly helpful in this work that we're doing, but there are also negative consequences to that. So I would love to ask your thoughts, just thinking system related, thinking about journalism media too, about your own experiences and what you've seen not done well, what you've seen done well, how does that impact FGMC and racism? And then I also just want to, in general, thinking about calling out, thinking about best practices, thinking about what we could do, wanted to invite Aissata and Sunera as well to, if you have any thoughts and reflections around that as well. So Aarefa, to start with you first.
No, absolutely. I mean, when it comes to the media, it's really a double bind, because we know, and even from the experience of the anti-FGC movement growing in India, it began because of the media. It began, the media has been crucial for raising the awareness and really spreading the word to everybody, and to really force this topic out in public. And this happened just 7 years ago, or maybe a little longer. But we also struggle with the fact that the media can be extremely in the kind of language that they choose to use in headlines, in the text, in the kind of images that are screened in news videos, or put in the papers. All of that is it's so important to get that right, in order to really help readers and viewers get a nuanced understanding that is not, that doesn't get founded on racist ideas. So in the Indian media, when they talk about, the Bohra community practicing FGC, the Bohra, part of the problem is that the Bohra community itself can be very racist about this, and say that, we just, so when you speak to defenders of the practice within the community, they will always claim, we circumcise, we don't mutilate, we don't do what those Africans do. So it's a very, it's appalling. And many people in the community are still not willing to acknowledge that this is a fundamentally racist point, and that you're othering an entire continent of people just because, well, no other reason, simply it's race, right? And then in the media itself, that gets played out in headlines where, it's constantly referred to as, the African practice, rather than acknowledging that this is a global problem. And, women and girls from various racial groups and ethnicities are subjected to this. And, and then constantly using terms like barbaric, savage, rather than, I think what Leyla pointed out, right, that call it what it is. If it's sexual abuse, if it's child abuse, call it that. But to use terms like barbaric, that's just, tribal, savage, that's just uncalled for. And then that leads to people viewing the community, and all of the community and the people in the community as, not as human beings, but just as, people who don't know any better. Then people are really surprised to know how well educated the Bohra community is, but because they can't reconcile it with the fact that, oh, you practice this thing, this barbaric act. So I think that's a constant struggle. And we have been, at Sahiyo, we have made an effort to sensitize members of the media about this. We've published a toolkit, we've held a workshop about it, and hopefully that, if we keep calling it out and keep, holding the media accountable to make sure that they are sensitive in the way they report about this, they're sensitive to the survivors and to the community itself, right? You can't antagonize the community by othering it and then expect them to be open to change. So there's that, yeah. When it comes to the media, that's an issue for sure.
Thank you so much, Aarefa. And we can, since you mentioned the toolkit, we could put the toolkit link in the chat box too. But I do want to try to be respectful of not going over too much, but I do want to give Aissata and Sunera an opportunity to talk about just thinking about the overall calling out systems, any reflections that you might have, any other last points you would like to share with us today. And Sunera, would you like to go first?
Yes. Well, I think it's a really sensitive topic in what concerns also what should we do with this, with FGM, and how should we deal. Racism do it difficult to target all this issue in what concerns primary care. As racism is everywhere, well, people don't come to see us. There are many studies that really just confirm that people from marginalized communities don't come to the doctor because of the racism and how they are treated as and dehumanized. So my question, and I also had this question because the solution is not easy, is how to help to at least in the Swedish context. So it means that people go to the African other lands. That my parents took me to Pakistan to do it. So how can we avoid this situation? And it's in tackling the patriarchy norms. So it's not about criminalizing the mother or the sister or who is. It's about focusing in why is FGM happening. Is because it's a patriarchal norm performed by women. So it's men don't need even to put their hands dirty. It's performed by women. So my first question is, how could we to deal with this situation? We have to deal first with racism and also with this toward the otherness and the patriarchy norms. So that's a really difficult one. I was with in Spain. I was in a primary care discussion group about FGM, doing a protocol, and they were all white women, and there was so much bias about anthropology and maybe about these uncivilized beasts. Maybe they do like this. It's like this in their communities, and it's like normalized. So the whole context were misunderstands. This was not. Yeah. So I want to hear what Aissata maybe wants to add.
Thank you so much. So I think for me, one of the things that I'm very conscious about is that, yes, we have to call out the systems, and then after we finish calling out, we call in. And I think that the calling in piece is also very important when we're working on these issues, because of the fact that for better or worse, we need to end female genital mutilation, right? And then so we have to find areas where there are allyship and bring that in. But in bringing allies into it, we also have to make sure that the voices are not lost. And so there's really the continuous tension of how do we go about advocating, calling out the system, and when do we then come back in and regroup and create a new system out of it. And some of the solutions that I think really matter is the fact that we are talking about power, and the extension of power is money. So we have to understand where the money comes from and where the money goes. And I think that maybe Leila was talking about it a little bit, right? About funding and who are the people that get funded in order to solve these issues. The funding should go to the people that have the lived experience. Whether you're talking about issues around Black Lives Matter, whether you're talking about the Me Too movement, whether you're talking about FGMC, you have to actually give money to people who understand the issue, that have lived the issue, that live in the communities, so that they are able to create their own solutions. So that's the first thing that I will say to this. So echoing what Leila had said. The second thing that I will say is that we really have to understand that we are not in competition with each other. So I think that when, for the African activists, right, when the Asian activists like Maria and Sahiyo and everybody started talking about ending FGM and the fact that they were being overlooked, there are tensions, because then the issue is, but are people going to forget about us, right? And we really shouldn't have that competition. We need to understand that if Sahiyo is talking about FGMC and there's no limit, we're talking about it, we're all going toward the same goals. And we have to be intentional that when we are in our spaces, if I am talking, I need to mention my Asian sisters. And if my Asian sisters are talking, they need to mention the African sisters as well. So the competition within the movements also need to be put to rest, because once again, it's one of the ways that power is being wielded against us. It's that we think that there's not enough space for all of us. Listen, there is enough space. There is enough space. We have enough voices. Every voice matters. Stop the competition. Then the final thing that I will say is for the allies, right? Once you learn about the issue, yes, you have learned it maybe from a survivor, or you've learned it by extension from an organization. Understand that you still have limited knowledge, right? So be an ally, go and actually help the communities, help the movement, but do not take over the movement, right? Do not think that now you are an expert in going and sitting and talking about these issues, because unless you have lived some of these experiences, you can never fully understand it. So having that humble pie in the way that you approach the issue is really important. And I speak to that because I've been in rooms where maybe it's been researchers or maybe government officials or whomever that has been doing this for 3 decades, and they will think that they know about the issue more than me, who has actually gone through it. And that's not necessarily true, right? I acknowledge that you know a lot about it, but you haven't actually lived it. So that truth also needs to be there. And I think at the end of the day, female genital mutilation, issues of racism, it's all about power, and power, to reclaim it, you have to organize. So we have to organize and go talk to our people that are working on Black Lives Matter. We have to organize and talk to our people that are working on the Me Too. And yes, sometimes they will close the door in our face. It's gonna happen, but we just have to keep going. And it is because of the fact that they want to focus on their issues, but we are also part of those movements, right? Like Black Lives Matter, the leaders might not want to listen, but I am a Black person. I could still go to other Black people and still talk about FGM and still work on it. So I just want to give that ray of hope and caution and all of the mix. And I just want to thank you guys for organizing this. It was really great. So thanks.
Thank you, Aissata, and thank you everybody for being willing to talk on this issue. And Leila, I wanted to say at the very beginning, thank you so much for acknowledging that this is a hard topic to talk about. And as we end now, and I see so many people stayed on as well for this conversation. So many people find this incredibly important. And I haven't had a chance to read all the chat, but I see there's a passionate conversation going on the chat too. After this, everybody, please take care of yourself. This is a very difficult conversation, and I'm so glad that we were here together to be able to share in this conversation. And I know that this is just the beginning as well, and we need to have many more conversations. And I just, again, thank you all. Aissata, thank you again for wrapping us up and with your last remarks as well too. And with that, I think we are going to end this conversation for today only, but hopefully we can find other ways to collaborate together. I do want to say one thing. Thank you for calling out the competition piece. Actually, I think that is very, very important. And I think that relatively speaking, the Asia movement is newer in recognizing and really doing work, but you said it perfectly. There's no need for competition. We can actually learn from each other too. And I think that we need to find ways to communicate and learn from one another. And just the African movement is so much older than ours and has much more wisdom and experience too. And obviously different contexts within Asia too, but there's ways for us to collaborate. And the end goal is the same. All of us are working towards ending FGMC and trying to ensure that future generations do not have to undergo this. So I hope that this leads to more conversations and that we can find ways to collaborate together. So thank you all again so much for joining us. And I hope you all have a wonderful rest of the day, and please take care of yourselves. Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Bye.
Bye.